Putin has basically gained what he wanted. I mean, a few kilometers here and there, not maybe. He was not out in the beginning to have territory. He wanted NATO out. He didn't want to have foreign troops on his border, and he wanted to have the access to the Black Sea, and he wanted to have some safety guarantees for the pro-Russian population, Russian speaking, whatever you want to call them, in the East. And he has much more than he had actually gone for in the beginning. So he's coming out of this war as a much stronger country than he went into the war. That's an interesting thing. I mean, really, he wanted to cut Russia to pieces. Now he negotiates with China, United States on equal level. It is gone for him. So why should he change it? Why should he go a few villages in Donbass he didn't have or whatever? I mean, why should he give this?
Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and I've got the great honor today of talking to Michael von der Schulenburg, a German member of the European Parliament. In his youth, Mr. von der Schulenburg escaped communist rule in East Germany, then studied in Berlin, London, and Paris, after which he started working for the United Nations, including as UN Assistant Secretary General. He served in many of the world's troubled spots, such as in Haiti, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, and many more. He also wrote the formidable book, On Building Peace, Rescuing the Nation State and Saving the United Nations. Unsurprisingly, he's also an outspoken critic of the belligerent politics of the EU and its member states, as we are seeing right now. That's what we want to discuss today. So, Mr. von der Schulenburg, welcome.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Hello to Japan, I guess, no?
Exactly.
Long distance, huh?
It is, but we found a very good time frame to talk to each other. And
Yeah.
I really am burning to hear your assessment of what's currently happening in the European Union, because we are seeing this drive for remilitarization. And, in your book, you have an entire chapter called Is Peace Escaping Us? Is it already gone? Peace in, not just in Eastern Europe, but the
No, it's not
mindset
gone.
of peace.
It's not gone. And interesting enough, by somebody who I thought I would never like, Mr. Trump. He's what he's doing there, and I know a little bit about negotiations. How he does it, I mean, he does it always with his loud voice and all the music he has, but it's very professionally done. The peace in Ukraine, and the sad thing is, although this is a war on European territory in one of our neighboring countries, the European Union was not able to bring peace there. The Americans had to come. I mean, unbelievable. I was on Wednesday in the European Parliament. We approved a resolution about Ukraine in which we called to continue the war. While there were negotiation peace in Jeddah. Unbelievable. There was somebody standing up and saying, shouldn't we postpone it and wait up what comes there? It was voted down by a majority from conservatives, liberals, the Greens, of course. I mean, I sit sometimes back in this parliament, and I think what I observed there can't be true. Now, in the meantime, this resolution has also hate language towards Trump. I mean, who are we? I mean, little Europe, 5% of the world population. Now, according to Price Waterhouse in 2050, Europe will be, as a European Union, we say always Europe, European Parliament. It's not the European Parliament, it's the EU Parliament. And, we will be 4.5% of the population. And we will only have 9% of the global GDP, 9%. I mean, we are small. So what do we do there? We want to become the superpower, and we behave already like as we are one. No, I think the European Union is going to collapse on its Ukraine policy. A collapse, I think. We are very close of collapsing. And the collapse will come from finances. Because what we try to do is this militarization, the cost of the war, the rebuilding of Ukraine, maybe Ukraine membership. I mean, crazy. Ukraine membership. I mean, it goes into the trillions. I mean, we don't have the money. I mean, this latest decision of 800 billion, not a penny is there. Not a penny is there. It's just an intention. There's no money. And so I think the European Union has completely lost the touch to reality. And that's very sad because we are European countries with such a tradition of diplomacy, such long tradition. We have also a tradition of wars, of course, and how we solve wars. It seems to be all forgotten.
But you've been there and you've seen this process happening. How did we get from a place where we had people who did realpolitik, like Willy Brandt and
Yeah,
Olaf Palme and so on,
yeah.
to this
Kreisky here in
abomination? How
Austria.
did we get there?
I have no idea. I have no idea. I think the this group of politicians felt that the Ukraine war was a chance of making the European Union a state because the population usually doesn't want it. You know, there was a solidarity. We have to go shoulder to shoulder against this enemy from outside, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, this imperialist who wants to occupy and have coffee in Vienna and so all of those things. Yeah. And I think it's failing. It's just failing. And we have become a real adversary to the United States now, but we don't have the means. We have resolutions that are 13, 18 pages long and not a single word on diplomacy, on negotiations in this whole thing. Or not. I mean, these resolutions, in my view, are breaches of the UN Charter because in the UN Charter, all countries in the world, all 193, including all the Europeans, agreed that we should negotiate our conflicts in order to prevent wars or where the wars start to help to end them very early. And we don't do this. I, I don't know why. I mean, really, I can't understand it. I'm flabbergasted up there.
I mean, the Europeans have participated in reckless wars before. There were certain European EU states involved in the Iraq war, not all of them. It was the coalition of the willing. Germany didn't go along. But now with this particular one, it seems it has galvanized the Europeans into, or like at the EU, almost almost entirely, with the exception of Hungary and Slovakia, has galvanized them into a war frenzy against
Yeah.
an old enemy. Can you,
It's
is
almost a
this your,
drunkenness. I have frenzy. It's a drunkenness. You know, you have lost control over it. It is the words used in the parliament are worse than what I've heard in the Iran-Iraq war. You know, in the Iran-Iraq war, you know, the negotiation took place actually in my house for the ceasefire. No? We almost lost our lives over that. But you know, one could talk to all the sides, and they would talk at least to us rationally. But here, it's not there anymore. You know, for instance, in all the wars I've experienced, and I've seen a lot of wars. You know, was my job always. No? Uh, both sides always try to keep contact, very often through the UN. I mean, Iran-Iraq war, which was the biggest with 1 million people dead, 8 year long war. You know, it was the UN, and that's why I was on the one side. I know we went forward and backward, but we went forward and backward because both sides agreed on it. Now we don't have any communications whatsoever. I mean, who do we think we are? I mean, we lose all these things, and so I think Europe is going to be the big loser. I mean, the big loser is of course Ukraine. What I said is it's a very big loser, but the other loser is Europe, and I think we will be impacted for for many years. For many years, what we are doing. Now we want to have more money in military, extremely more money. I mean, we speak now in the resolution of 4% of the GDPs. That's a huge amount. That means our military in that case would be something like 5, 6 times as large as Russia's, which creates, of course, in Russia also a reaction. You know, you can't only increase your conventional forces. Russia will, of course, rely then on nuclear bombs because they couldn't otherwise match it. So there is no talk about negotiations, about confidence building measures, about reducing the armament in Europe. Not at all. It's all gone. It's all gone. And for nothing. And then we have, of course, here yesterday was in this interview where we had some very high level Austrians. They were convinced that Russia is going to want to occupy Austria. I mean, that's what they say. I mean, I don't know if I kind of laugh or I don't know what to say.
I mean,
I mean, Russia can hardly
there's
fight
people,
this war. I mean, they need 3 years to get a few kilometers. They don't even got the whole Donbass. Of course, they win in the end, but it's with in huge efforts. And you say if they want to attack NATO countries, even when the Secret Service in the United States says there is no chance that Russia will attack any NATO country. We say it is. I don't know why.
But this is what we need to try to answer in one way or another is how is it possible that within the Russia is evil narrative and Russia is an evil
Yeah.
aggressor, we have at the same time one strain of the narrative saying if we just pump more weapons into Ukraine, we will break Russia. On the other hand, we have the argument Russia will attack Austria tomorrow. How are these two beliefs possible at the same time up to the highest level of politicians who feed this? And if I listen to you, I think you're saying the people who, in the European Parliament, they don't only say that in order to make others believe it, they believe it themselves, right?
They really believe it. Yes, they believe it. Yesterday we had the somebody who was the highest judge in Austria. I mean, she was adamant, and she had no clue about wars and peace. I must say that, I know a little bit about this. She was adamant that Russia was about to attack us. I said, but how? I read to her the report of the Secret Services of the United States. They do one annual report, no, about the threat to the United States, where they clearly say there is no threat from Russia to attack a NATO country. And we say that nonetheless. And I read it to her, and she continues arguing it. I don't know. It's I don't know what to say even. It's and people like me who know a little bit about of war. I mean, I'm treated like a traitor, although I try to say, I mean, all wars are like this one. In all wars we have a propaganda, and we behave like a war country ourselves by saying the story. That the other one is guilty, and it's in all the wars the same. And we want to justify to our population why we go to war, why we spend money on it, and why we shoot at somebody else. So we must be the good one, and they must be the bad one. It's typical for all the wars. And anybody in the country who says against it is, of course, a traitor because he undermines the defense, the war mentality of the people, or whatever. But I said to them, now that we have a very close to a ceasefire, we have to drop this because we know that's propaganda. It's propaganda to justify our investments in the war of Ukraine. Now we have to come to a conclusion what this war was really about. And we know the Americans say now what it was about. They say it was about NATO. Trump says it. Trump says Biden caused the war, not Putin. And then now we are saying it's Putin. I mean, the the reassuring thing of it all is that Europe can't do anything. All these resolutions are not worth the paper they're written on because they don't have the means of doing any foolish things. But what they do is, of course, to undermine Europe. When Merz is being elected, he's elected because they hope that he revitalizes the economy in Germany. But how can he revitalize the economy when he at the same time blocks himself off the East? The East for us is far more important than the transatlantic things economically. That's where the raw materials are, that's where cheap energy is, that's where the markets in China and India, blah, 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 and Central Asia. I mean, now we can't go there anymore because we have a war and we have the sanctions and we have a pipeline that is blown up. And we seem to think that we can revive our economy without building bridges to the east. I don't know.
It's
At the
just
same time, we have now to face tariffs by Mr. Trump. I mean, and even then we don't start to think. It's just a complete loss of, I don't know. I
at
really don't. We say in German Kopflos, you lose your brain, no?
headless.
And we have also very weak politicians, of course, in Europe, no? I mean, look at this one, Macron. I mean, Macron, he's not even the majority anymore, and he wants to
Sure.
send soldiers onto Ukraine, which will not happen, no? It will not happen, no?
Yeah, but it's, weak leadership is one thing, but a leadership that is so utterly irrational and even when reality strikes, with the force of a war, and then strikes in many other fronts. I mean, the fact that the biggest threat to European territory is not from Russia, it's from the United States, which says that they want Greenland and take it away from Denmark, right? The threat to democracy is from within that we now have in Romania. And as just somebody who was
In
like said, you
Germany,
cannot
in
run because
Germany,
you
I
cannot
can
run.
hardly talk in Germany. I mean, I go to the United States, I can talk in Columbia University like in January. I would never be accepted to talk in a German university. I would never get a room. It's just what it is. I mean, Germans are always the worst in all the things. And yeah, that's what the situation now is. And but reality will catch up with us, and I
Yes.
think that will be very costly, and costly in form of loss in economic development, but also the cost of the Ukraine war. I mean, peace is going to be very expensive, probably more expensive than the war itself.
Absolutely, and there needs to be a way forward. But the fear, my fear is, of course, that this lunatic view of the world continues. On the other hand, we have strong indications that on the ground people are changing their perceptions, and you have these the parties on both sides, and in the right wing and on the left wing, who are now saying, and Germany, France, and so on, and Hungary already for a while, this is not how we can continue doing
Sadly, very little on the
business.
left wing. No, I mean the left party in Germany has become very pro-war, very
Yes,
much pro-war.
yes. But the
I
B
mean,
the
the left in the
BSW.
European Parliament, the majority votes for all these resolutions for war. I mean,
Yes,
the left.
yes,
And so we leave actually, and I think that's probably one of the trouble we will have in the future. We leave actually peace to the right-wing parties.
yes.
And I think that's not a good thing because, wars is always social injustice in the extreme. I mean, who sits in the trenches? The little guy, and who drives a car here from the Ukrainians, the Maseratis and the, I mean, really, these cars. I mean, these are the Ukrainians who are out. And inflation or the cost of this sort of things. I mean, it's always the working class, the low income class, the pensioners. So it should be really on the left, but it is not. And we have tried this with Sarah Wagenknecht to do this, but we lost the elections.
Yeah.
Yet now we have in the German parliament, you say people are sort of against the war, but in the German parliament, they voted only parties who are for the war. There's not now a single party in the German parliament who is oh no, AfD, of course, but it's a different thing.
Not a left-wing
Otherwise,
party.
I mean, the left, all these parties are pro-war and pro-armament, rearming Europe. What for? For a war that doesn't exist.
Because I am trying to explain this to myself, because I mean I remember the Iraq war and how heavily it was
Mm.
opposed, especially by the left. And
Yeah, yeah.
this left,
And by the Greens at the time. By the Greens, can you
yeah.
imagine? There was the Greens at the time, yeah.
Um,
I know, I served in Iraq, no? I
you,
was, I worked for the UN in Iraq. I was a chief negotiator there. Yeah.
but during the Iraq-Iran time, or then the
Both,
Iraq war
both. I was
2003.
Iran-Iraq. I was in Iran, and then the Iraq War. I mean, I was in Iraq. I was in all these countries, yeah.
What is your view on the influence, the role of the United States over the European security psyche?
Yeah, I think now we have a deep split between the United States and the European Union and UK. And this is a split that is going to last. It's not something that goes away easily, and it will not even go away after Trump. I think that there is a deep mistrust now among both sides, deep split. Europe is going to be the loser. Europe's economy is lagging behind the United States economy. We have very little chance to catch up with all the things. Innovations are down in Europe. This whole high technic, artificial intelligence, all these things, we have hardly anything anymore. So I think we are really falling back now, and I think that, yeah, I think the that's a split now that is going to last. No?
On the other
I
hand,
mean,
we
the
have
United States withdraws from the war. They caused, like the Ukraine war and like all the other wars around us. They are all caused by the United States, but the costs are coming to the Europeans and afterwards. No?
yes, all while the United States keeps saying that Europe needs to pay its fair share. which
They
is
have,
tremendous.
they're lucky.
While saying that they
Geography is very lucky for them. They just withdraw over the Atlantic.
yeah,
We only have the
and then they're safe.
Mediterranean. Hmm?
Yeah, and then they're safe. And I mean, even during the Cold War and now too, it was pretty clear if there's ever going to be a nuclear exchange, it will be Europe that's gone
Yeah,
first.
yeah.
And
I mean,
the Europeans today are
yesterday.
willing to have that.
I
They're
mean,
willing.
yesterday there was a very strong feeling against Trump, of course, this sort of things, and the sort of the progressive people there. And I said, I don't like Trump either, but you shouldn't forget, because he started to talk to Putin, the threat of nuclear war is gone. I mean, this is a big thing for Europeans, because this nuclear war would be on European territory, especially on Germany, with all the American bases. I mean, we would be finished in 10 minutes. 10 minutes, maybe 12. And we can't be happy about this. We should be very happy, because now this is very unlikely. Now they talk to each other, no? We should also be very happy that in a neighboring country of us, these 100,000 young people who die, especially at the end of the war. Usually in the UN, we always assume that in the last months of any war, most of the people die. Sometimes half of the soldiers die in the last months only. And the reason is, of course, on the losing side, that they have to shift from their defense positions, and they start to disintegrate, and the organization doesn't work. And so also when you look at the Second and First World War, most people died in the last 6 months. And that's what's happening now. It's a butchery, no? I mean, it's a butchery that happens there. And I say to the Europeans, I mean, what you're doing is you support murder. I mean, this is murder, because you can't even call this a war anymore, because the Ukrainians can't win it. You can't win it. So you better say ceasefire. But if I say ceasefire in the parliament, I get sometimes these 1 minute speeches. I'm I mean, I'm aggressed in the parliament really heavily. I mean, including that my family should be ashamed of me. I say only what I have always said in the UN. And, it's unbelievable, unbelievable. And I think it's for the advantage of the Ukrainians. And what I'm saying, because of course I don't want this. I want Ukraine to survive as a country, and I want as few people die as and things like that, and that they don't have to leave their home country and things like this. When I'm more against it, but you can only do it when you finish the war, when you end the war and start to negotiate. And
There,
they
there,
don't understand it.
there's just this very, very strong feeling that this war can only end in one way, which is victory of Ukraine, get all the territory back, and
Military
Vladimir
victory.
Putin in The Hague. That's the only acceptable
Yeah,
outcome.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. They think they're on the moral high side, which they are not, and they have nothing to do. That's why I say an unprovoked. Of course, it's not an unprovoked war, and things like this. When and if you say that, it creates such an anger among these people, and this is a great majority. I mean, from the 700, regularly 500 vote for the war from the deputies. No.
Can we talk about this anger? Because anger happens when people feel not just misunderstood, but when they feel that the other person attacks them personally, right? But you're obviously talking about an event of world affairs. Do you think that these people have so far internalized these narratives that these narratives are now part of their worldview? It's like you claiming that the sky is red, and then at some
Oh
point they get
yeah.
angry
Oh
because
yeah, yeah,
obviously
yeah.
the sky is blue.
Yesterday, yes, I could say what I wanted. They thought I'm crazy. Now Putin's going to attack us. He has so many weapons, and I said no. We just have a new report from the Swedish Peace Institute there that that NATO has 60% of all the military expenditures, 41% alone in the United States, and Europe taken together is something like 17%. China is 10%, and Russia is only 5%. I mean, I say, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? I mean, we have such an oversupply on armaments and technology in the war. I mean, why should Russia attack us? I mean, they're the smaller ones here, and you can't talk it. It's just not accepted. It's
If
just
we,
not accepted.
i-
And I tell you, I think what it is, because it's a typical thing by a certain political elites, and things like this one. I think it's because they all realize that Europe has lost it. Europe has lost what they still felt was sort of to lead the world, and especially the European country. I mean, in the time I'm there, I would say 80 or maybe 85% of all the resolutions we pass are moral judgments on other countries. So the European Parliament behaves as if it's a sort of the moral institution of the world. Constantly we have something about Sudan, something about Azerbaijan, something about Armenia, something, of course, Russia and China, blah, blah, blah. I mean, constantly we have a resolution that other countries don't behave properly. Unbelievable.
Just,
And
just, just,
when I
just
go,
the
when I
Europeans
go,
are
look
above
at these 700 people, 700 people, most of them, have, I mean, what do they know about these countries? I mean, I wouldn't even allow myself to judge a country so quickly. I've served for many years, and I mean, it's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing if it's good or bad. I don't ever think in these moral terms, but they feel fine. Now, there's an interesting thing. 2 days, 3 days ago, there was a resolution on Syria, where they supported this al-Shara without any questions that he does the right thing, blah 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 blah. There was no condemnation on the on this terrible murder on the Alawites. The European Parliament. Now we know that Russia and the United States have called for the Security Council meeting on Syria on Monday. And I can assure you, the United States has already, Trump administration at least has spoken out against these murders. And I'm sure this Security Council resolution will come through with China, United States, and Russia, and the Europeans withholding. And it will be by far more fair about what's really happening in Syria than what we ever do. So the whole world, also for me, has changed. I always felt that we actually the sort of the more considerate people, and the United States is the sort of the more warmongering thing. No, it's not anymore. It's not anymore. And it is something I don't know. Maybe on Monday I want to make a short clipping in things to thank Trump for what he did there. No, but let's see how the peace comes along, because I feel so embarrassed that this parliament sort of has this hateful language against him in the resolutions, not just in the speak, in the resolutions.
let me ask you.
It's the end of Europe. I mean, we're committing suicide.
Unfortunately, I think you are absolutely right. But let me ask you, this means that the EU is not a rational actor anymore. There are other processes that are now guiding a large majority of people. It's like a mass psychosis. They are not rational. From your experience, did you ever have a similar situation where you knew that one of the two sides of a conflict, or of the many sides of a conflict, is not a rational actor?
No. Sometimes when I speak, when I explain how we do negotiations, and I say always that, one of the things you look at the conflict parties, who's behaving rational. And rational has nothing to do with behaving good or bad. It simply means there's somebody or a leader who knows what he wants. It might be something very bad. And we can expect during the negotiation that he accordingly behaves accordingly. That means rationally towards the things. It makes negotiations easy. You have, of course, parties where you don't have it. And I said always, when you look at the Ukraine war, and that was during the Biden administration, the most rational one is Putin. Not that it's good or bad. It's just we know what he wants, and he will behave accordingly. And you saw that now in the press conference on accepting the things. Very rational, very rational. Then maybe the United States, because they want Ukraine at the time, as a to strengthen their claim to a unipolar world. But Europe, nothing at all. I mean, you wouldn't even know what to negotiate with them. You can't really negotiate over claims that Putin wants to attack Europe. I mean, there's nothing to negotiate because it is not there. So you have to come back to what the war is about. If you want to negotiate ceasefires or peace or whatever, it's mostly ceasefires. Peace are very rarely. So this is not happening. So Europe is irrational. It's, when I'm there, I'm asking sometimes and saying, if the EU would sit down and would define what its interests are, what its real interests are, then you can't say that the sanctions are in their interest. You can't say that having a fight with Russia is in their interest. You can't say that a fight with China is in their interest, no? You can't say that destroying the Ukraine is in their interest. I mean, it's not in their interest. If we want to develop economically, we need the East. So what we are doing now is completely irrational, also in the sense that we are unable to formulate our interests. It is all covered in this ideological, moralistic sort of language of defending democracy or all the funny things. Even now, the leader of the left party in Germany said, we defend democracy on the border to Russia. Before it was in Afghanistan. I mean, it's so strong that there's very little to argue, actually.
Is it possible that this situation is a result of the institutional setup of the European Union because there's just so many individual groups that are involved in it that nothing else but ideology can come out of it? That there's just
I mean, I've said that the whole Ukraine policy will now endanger the future of the European Union. I mean, we will be really shaken. You will see the solidarity will crumble now, little by little. No, it started already. No, not only Slovakia and Hungary. I mean, I think the Poles will see it differently, very interestingly, and Italians and things like this one. So it will come one after the other. Now the Dutch have now voted against arming Europe and so on. I think that will come now more and more. So Europe's solidarity will crumble, and it will even more crumble if the cost of the war comes to us. If we want to have really 3-4%, we don't have the money for that one. And then comes all that we want to rearm Ukraine. We don't have the money for that one. If then comes that we have to rebuild Ukraine, because one of the objectives of Trump is to say, oh, become member of the European Union and the membership and things like this. It's trillions of dollars, trillions. And we don't have it. We don't have it. And we don't even have the 800 billion of which they talk now about. We don't have it. So I think it's usually money who on which one collapses, no, because nobody wants to pay it anyway in the end.
do you see um what do you think is the role of the United Nations? Can maybe because on the one hand the UN is incredibly weak at the moment, on the other hand the UN is the last thing that everybody agrees that they want to be in conformity with, even while they criticize the UN heavily, but nobody ever said we need to abolish the UN. Is there a way to work through the UN to get to a better place?
You know, the UN started to almost die, with the Wolfowitz doctrine.
Mm.
No? The UN is built on a multipolar world in multi-dimensional, multi sector sort of peace, whereas then Wolfowitz says, no, it's only one country. We will tell what it is. And then we
Pax
changed.
Americana.
We didn't speak about the UN Charter anymore. We spoke suddenly about the rules-based order, and that meant, of course, the American order and things like this one. The interesting thing is that even in the latest things the EU published, suddenly they didn't speak about the rules-based order anymore. They speak about the UN Charter, on which I know a lot about, UN Charter and the international law based on the UN Charter. Interestingly, if you look at the BRICS countries, they say our common denominator is the UN Charter. I mean, these countries are 6 times to 7 times larger than the European Union. I mean, as a group.
Mhm.
And so I think my argument is that if with the end of the Ukraine war, we have to realize that wars among major states is not possible anymore, even less than during the Cold War, because of weapons of mass destruction, because of all the other technology, the artificial intelligence, the speed of which rockets are now can be fired and not being shot down anymore. I think we can simply, today, you can in 10 to 15 minutes destroy the whole world, no? And we have to come to senses that this is not possible anymore. So the UN Charter, which says, I mean, you can summarize it, never war again. That's what the UN Charter basically says. I think will become more important. And I think I'm quite encouraged. I mean, this Trump surprised me all the time. He has now invited China and Russia to talk about these rockets and these nuclear devices.
Mhm.
Not Europe, by the way. Europe is not being invited, which is a good thing because we have to come to senses first. Not a good thing, but I mean, in this
A
state, we can't
reasonable thing.
invite Europe.
Mhm.
Huh?
A reasonable thing.
What? Reasonable, yeah, yeah, reasonable. I mean, under these conditions, and um, and I think it's a good thing. You know, we should not forget what Trump is doing here. He is inviting two countries who are not necessarily on his side to negotiate. So he will be in the minority there.
But you know
It
that
will have also a reform of the UN Security Council. The biggest problem in the UN is the UN Security Council. The European Council was formed during the colonial times. When the resolution came up in the Security Council on Ukraine, the United States won it with 10 votes for it. That means all the Asian, all the African, and all the Latin American countries voted with China and Russia and the United States for this resolution. 5 countries abstained. 5 countries were European countries, Western European countries, the EU and Great Britain. Now, the question that will this raise now, and I tell you, we will have this in a year time. Why has a part of the world, which is only 5% of the world population, over 33% of say in the biggest decision-making body of the world, the UN, the Security Council? We will lose it. We will lose it. You will see. UK is going to lose its permanent seat.
But no, because the UK can veto any such decisions, right?
Not if everybody is against it. No, we can't. In the end, it would not be possible. Um, I think the there might be ways around, but I think we have seen now that because of our colonial times, Europe is so overrepresented
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And now they see, usually they see Europe as the ones who pay for development, to do the good things, blah, 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 blah. But now they see them, no, they are for the war. They want to continue the war. So I think they made themselves vulnerable to this type of criticism. And I tell you, it will come.
I hope it comes. The question to me is how to realize the title of a book that Glenn Deason wrote, which is
Yeah,
how to
yeah.
make the Europeans realize that they're nothing but the Western Peninsula of Eurasia. How to get that realization into Europe,
I gave
that
also
you're
an
not
interview with him.
special.
No, I quite liked him. Yeah, of course.
What else are
Of
you? I
course.
mean, what else are we?
In the parliament, we have Mrs. von der Leyen. She comes always as if she is the president of the United States of Europe. But we don't have a United States of Europe. And she is actually the head of an administration. The the commission is an administration, no? It's not even the government. But she puts up her finger and says, all these countries which don't go with our sanctions, we have sanctions against them too. But
That's
who is
the
she?
way to ruin and rupture, because in the end, nobody's going to play with you anymore, and you're going to be alone.
No,
So alone.
no, no.
Yeah, I tell you, like my Indonesian friends, Indonesian diplomats ask me, Pascal, what's up with the Europeans? What
Yeah.
the whole world
And tell them I'm
looks at
sitting in the
Europe and don't.
European Parliament and I can't give them an answer. I can't give them an answer. I can't give him an answer. We have also no leadership inside. Mrs. von der Leyen is not a leader. She's a single-minded person, but Callas and Kubilius and all these very warmongering people there. It's no, we have no leadership, and we have also, Trump is not, Macron, Scholz, Merz will be, I think, probably even weaker. I think he is going to be a very weak chancellor if he ever becomes chancellor. And then we have Starmer. Starmer has hardly any popularity in his own country. I mean, these are nobodies anymore.
What would your advice be if you could advise Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, and Donald Trump on what to do in order to shake up the Europeans. I mean, shake up in the sense of to make them realize what's happening. What would your advice be?
What they're doing, ignore them. I mean, what can you do?
Aren't you afraid that the Europeans are going to learn the wrong lesson as so often and just going to remilitarize and then pulverize themselves? Because that's my worry. Like
No,
if
I don't
if
think
they
so. No, I don't think so. You know, the thing is, of course, don't forget, Europe, first of all, has a aging population, very strongly aging population. So it's not the population you do wars with. Then the percentage of people who are born or have their origins in other countries with very different cultures is enormously increased. In Germany, we say almost 25%. Now, that will be different with Ukrainians and people coming from Morocco or whatever. And it's not that I'm against them, but we have to, at all, actually, I like that. I mean, Morocco wasn't even, but we have to realize they will look after some time, not only bring a different religion with them, they bring also different political views. So Europe will not be able to have this value-driven policy on which they think they are the good ones. It will not be possible anymore.
it will grow
And
itself out.
hmm?
It will grow
So they
itself
can't go
out.
for war. Why should a Turkish-born child go for war for us? Why? Die for us? Come with one leg or blind back. I mean, why? It won't happen. It won't happen. So, we have a shortage in the Bundeswehr. People don't want to go to the Bundeswehr. We have now children in the Bundeswehr which are below the age of 18, because we can't
In the
find
German
any.
army.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now there's a whole discussion whether we should have a mercenary army, also like the French, to have units which are employed from outside and things like this one. So I think that no, I think there was a word of Kriegstüchtigkeit, and I don't know how you translate it, being ready for war
War
mentality,
ability, war making ability.
war making ability. Okay, well, if this is the right expression, Tüchtigkeit ability, uh, Germany will never be that.
Well,
I mean,
well, that's good.
especially those who vote for the Green Party, they don't go to war. They only want the war somewhere else. No, it will not happen. Europe can't do it anymore. It's a tired continent, and um, no, I think nothing of the 800 billion will become in reality, and all these huge plans for militarization will not come. The integration of armament will not come. I mean, how once you want a French soldier driving a German tank? I mean, it's just impossible, and it will not come. It will not happen, and that's a good thing. I
Okay, so
quite like. I would quite like a European Union which is far less centralized and more sees diversity in Europe as one of the strengths of Europe.
yeah, and not this drive to make everything the same all over.
Oh, same. And you know what we see now? This drive is immediately married with the idea that you have to be militarily strong,
Yeah.
and that I don't like.
I don't understand why never learns from its own history. Every single time somebody tries to make the continent one, the same, bring it together, it ends in war. Every single time.
No. Ask Napoleon.
Without fail.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a good argument. Yeah, it's true. And I spoke yesterday also, and I said, do you realize for Germany, because it's a German-speaking thing, I said that Germany and Austria in the First and Second World War was much about who controls the Ukraine.
right.
And it was all to take advantage of the divisions in the Ukraine between East and West in order to control it. It was in the First World War like this one. We even interrupted the ceasefire, and in the Second World War, and now we do it again. I mean, unbelievable, and we seem not to learn from it.
No, it's
And we're
this.
losing again. I must almost say, luckily we lose because I think it's an awful policy we do there.
It's
Yeah.
I still wonder how to de-escalate everything because it's of course still extremely dangerous. So And how do I de-escalate this war mentality in Europe that seems to just like spiral? It fires up itself. It's worse now, 3 years into the war than it was in the beginning, and it was already horrible in the beginning. Um,
I'm not so sure. You know, I think all the things that happens is not dangerous to the outside, funny enough, because we can't implement what we say.
mm,
It's only hurting ourselves. We spend money on something which we don't need, you know, and
yeah.
we are on the wrong side of a war and things like this one. But we can't really change it. We can't really. We don't have the military means to continue the war. We have not the military means to win over Russia and so on without the United States, and we will not. I think we never will, and that's a good thing.
I mean, I see what you mean. On the other hand, it was, I mean, part of the European policy was extremely hurtful and responsible for what happened to Ukraine and Russia, and they lost 1 million people or so combined, or it's like that's not an inside part, right? It's
Yeah, but this was Europe in as an appendix to the United States when that happened.
right.
Now they can't do it anymore. They can't. I mean, when you look at the joint declaration after the meeting on the 6th of March, there's nothing about sending armed peacekeepers. There's no word in it, because you can't agree on it. And there's no word of it. Callas wanted to have a 20 billion rapid fund for sending weapons to the Ukraine. Not a word about this. We can't anymore. We can't. It's only words, nasty words, and that's all. It's really betrayal of the Ukrainians, no?
Yeah, it is. It's
And Zelensky has understood it. I mean, he didn't stood with us. He went to Jeddah and he accepted it. It's very interesting. Also, the Ukrainians realize, what is very important. Rada, the parliament, sent a letter over the head of their president to President Trump, saying they would welcome his peace initiative, knowing that it meant a division of the country. That's what they did. I
let
mean,
me
Zelensky is out. The only reason why he's still there is because nobody wants to take his place until he signed this, what is basically a capitulation. You know, that's what he has to sign, and the next day he will disappear.
Can I ask you about this? First, your assessment of the process that's happening, this peace negotiation process, which comes in various forms. Secondly, I had a talk yesterday with Nikolai Petro, and he said there's a very real danger that if Mr. Zelensky actually starts thinking about signing this, whatever surrender declaration it will be, that he will be overthrown by the
Yeah,
ultra right wing, and that the Ukrainian military, at this point might actually take the side of the extremists. How likely do you think that scenario is?
I mean, I think Zelensky's political life, and maybe also his physical life, is in jeopardy. I mean, this will not survive a defeat because it's in the end a defeat. He is responsible for so many young people being killed. Most families have only one child. There must be enormous bitterness there. Yeah. And I think these people want peace. They don't dare to say it. I could even imagine that today in the Ukraine, Trump is more popular than any other politician. Yeah, I mean it. Yeah, I mean, it's
Um,
not that I like it, but people don't. But people want peace, and that's the only chance to have peace. And I think the great danger for them is that Ukraine becomes ungovernable afterwards. And that's not, we have about 300,000 armed militia forces and things like this one. But in general, it falls apart, and who fills in the vacuum, and then the oligarchs and all the corruption and all the things. So I think that the rest of the Ukraine will have it very difficult to sustain itself, very difficult, and and it will cost us a lot because we will get the refugees, and we will have to do something humanitarian there at least. People will not have electricity. That was already before the poorest country in Europe with Moldova. Now it's definitely the poorest country with huge debts everywhere. And I don't think that Ukraine has a much a chance to survive.
and some people say like a rump Ukraine would not survive, but I keep thinking that, what Austria is today is a rump Austria compared to what it was 120 years ago, and it's surviving. So I think as long as there's peace, there's ways forward economically. But
I think there's more divisions in Ukraine than there was in this little Austria. Also, Deutsch-Österreich, nannte
Mm,
man ja auch Deutsch-Österreich. It there was an identity, and they didn't have this problem among themselves at the time. They have, of course, the Civil War. No, don't forget they had the Civil War after the First World War. But I think, and it was for a long time ungovernable. But I think maybe the Ukraine, I don't know. I hope the best for them, and but I think I would not bet a big thing. No,
mm,
I was yesterday also asked, about the security guarantees, and I said that Russia would never accept NATO soldiers on Ukrainian territory, if you call them peacekeepers or not. It wouldn't, and it will not come. And we know Trump's position on this one is against. That's why he accused Zelensky of wanting a third world war. You remember they had the
yeah,
things
yeah.
because Zelensky wanted to. So he will not allow this, and the Russians will not allow it. And these two people will govern the things. I mean, they go together now to the Security Council on Syria. Can you imagine? I mean, how far this has gone already? Not with us. They go with the Russian there. So so I
Can
think
you
the real issue is when you have a ceasefire agreement or a peace agreement, rarely a peace agreement, usually are ceasefire agreements. They will be stable not because they are just, because there's no thing as a just peace agreement. Not because of the sun. They are stable because neither of the two sides can afford to change the decided status quo. Militarily, either they're militarily too weak, or the risk of starting a war again is far greater than any gain they could have. So Russia, I don't think, would have an interest to continue the war. They want to keep China and India on their sides. They want to have the BRICS countries on their side. They would not understand if they break this peace agreement. And I think Ukraine is simply too weak. So I think it's stable by itself. You will have infringements, there will be little provocations, things like this, but in general, it will be stable.
can you think of any other conflict that you were involved in as a negotiator and or otherwise,
Mhm.
where the question of security guarantees was as prominent as here? These security guarantee issues is so weird to me. It's so strange because I just can't place it with anything else. And the best security guarantee you can get is if nobody has an interest in attacking you. No neutral country
Yeah,
needs
changing
security
it.
guarantees
Nobody has
because
no. They might have an interest, but the risk of doing it is too large.
Mm,
You see, you starting a war is a big thing. Now, the biggest war I've been involved in which is most wars are yeah, intrastate wars, but this was of course Iran Iraq.
mhm.
And then when we had the ceasefire, by the way, it was from the UN General Security Council 598. They accepted it. All there was is a monitoring mission of the United Nations. There was nothing else but unarmed. I mean, they had only a sight gun. I mean, a pistol, things like this. Had no other weapons. They had some helicopters and this type of things, and they flew over the agreed border and they marked who would infringe it. But there was no soldiers in between, sort of keeping them apart. It's not possible with great countries. It's not possible because their armies are big to those. And it was only possible if both sides would agree that they do this job.
Mm.
So I think I could imagine something like this one. Unarmed people, OECD would not be able to do it.
Yeah.
It must be UN, who would sort of patrol this border.
It's just a
But
monitoring mission.
yeah, yeah, a monitoring mission, nothing more, not to report to the Security Council on the infringements and things like this one. But I think it is only possible when the likelihood for infringements is relatively small. If it's huge, you have to withdraw them because it's too dangerous for them and they can't do anything. It's only this casual things that happens. And I think that will be the case in the Ukraine. You know, there wasn't any big force separating Iran and Iraq, and these were big countries, no, with big armies, with quite heavily armed, and so it was only the symbolic sort of things keeping them apart. Mhm. And I think that might be the same thing in things there won't be armed peacekeepers or sort of an area which is not belong to anybody, and no, I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, all wars end. The question is just how and when, and let's hope that it ends soon. Michael von der Schulenburg, thank you very
I
much for
think
your
we are
time.
very soon. I must say, I know a little bit of negotiations. It is done extremely professional by the Americans. We always think Trump is a crazy man, but not in this case.
Can you explain a
It's
little bit
very
just
interesting
shortly?
who he spoke to first, who he spoke next, how he bent people's arms. I mean, making peace is not a nice thing. And I mean, very professionally done. And I'm sure that that Putin will go along with Trump. Absolutely sure. What Putin said in his interview, I don't know if have you followed this interview, his interview, his
I've
press
read the
conference?
transcript, what he said, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Very
I mean,
conciliatory.
absolutely. And what he said, what happens to the troops in Kursk, what happens there, that's a typical thing you negotiate in a ceasefire. Typical. I mean, there was nothing in it he said which
It's
was not.
details, actually.
Yeah, and the Ukrainian have to do the same. Both sides have to do the same, and that's why they have wanted only for 30 days to negotiate. And I think it's basically done. This deal is basically done. In our newspaper says Putin maybe doesn't want it. He wants to pull back and things like this one. They don't understand what Putin says is the normal things you have in all negotiation about the ceasefire. There was nothing else.
There's this argument that the Russians shouldn't agree to a ceasefire because it's better for Russia to march forward on the battlefield. But what we are seeing from Vladimir Putin and also from Mr. Lavrov, how they speak, is like they're saying like, no, we can achieve what we want through diplomatic means. Therefore, we will use
Yeah.
the diplomatic route.
Absolutely. I mean, for Putin has basically gained what he wanted. I mean, few kilometers here and there, not maybe. He was not out in the beginning to have territory. He wanted NATO out. He didn't want to have foreign troops on his border, and he wanted to have the access to the Black Sea, and he wanted to have some safety guarantees for the pro-Russian population, Russian speaking, whatever you want to call them, in the East. And he has now. He has much more than he had actually gone for in the beginning. He has and it's not being contested anymore. So he's coming out of this war as a much stronger country than he went into the war. That's an interesting thing. I mean, really, he wanted to cut Russia to pieces. Now he negotiates with China, United States on equal level. It is gone for him. So why should he change it? Why should he go a few villages in Donbass he didn't have or whatever? I mean, why should he give this? Why should he not be generous? If I were him, and I think he will do this, the 8,000 soldiers who are now encircled in Kursk, ask them to lay down their weapons, and he might not even ask for a surrender. He will say, if you leave your weapons behind, you can all march home.
Yeah,
and we
that
might
would
even
be
help you. Hmm?
The counter argument is that the
Russia and
Russians have
Ukraine
done
will
this.
have to live for the next 5,000 years together.
Yeah.
I think you better now start to build sort of, and sometimes having a word in common sort of binds you also, no? I mean, more or less.
The counter argument is that the Russians have tried goodwill gestures time and again, and it was immediately turned against them, right? And that there's now so much distrust on the Russian side that they wouldn't do goodwill gestures anymore. Do you believe that?
No, 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 not in this case, not in this case. I mean, Putin says, if they don't surrender, they will all die. And I don't think he would kill 8,000 soldiers. Oh, no, he wouldn't do such a massacre. That would be so bad for him also. No.
Okay.
No, I hope not.
Let's
hope. I
I
mean,
hope so.
these are young Ukrainians who didn't want to go to war, who have probably not even an education in war and sit there. They see their comrades dying next door and then they want to go home. I mean, it's a terribly sad story, and you know, the usually single child families and things like this one. I mean, it must be awful, awful, awful. And I tell you, I've seen heartbreaking things in these wars I've been into, what it means for families, what it means for those injured, you know, even soldiers who come back and have no physical injuries, but are mentally in such a state that they have always to sit in the black room in the family, and the family cannot do anything with them anymore. I mean, the scars are enormous of a war, and I think for every minute a war starts earlier, I would go for the minute earlier
Stops early.
because these are just people who are slaughtered for nothing, for
Yeah,
absolutely nothing. Hmm?
you're absolutely right. You're
Yeah,
so right. Michael, I have
and
to
I
let you
think
go
Trump is
because
right what he says. You know, he says that is too much, and he calls also on the Russian soldiers who die. Of course, it's the same thing. He says, you know, why do they die? We should stop that.
it's really
I
strange
mean,
because
maybe
like
other other motives, but I mean, I think it's the right thing to say.
Donald
And
Trump is
Europe
definitely the
can't say it.
humanist.
Europe can't say that. These are Europeans who die there, and we
Donald
can't say
Trump
it.
is the humanist in this scenario.
He's a peacemaker in this one. That's what he is, and he does it very cleverly. It's not a stupid thing.
This is a very good way to end this also on a positive note because I know that you have to catch a flight.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I flight back to Brussels, and I have to catch a little sleep because I slept I think only 2 hours now, and then yeah, let me have a yeah. Okay,
Michael von der Schulenburg, thank you
yeah,
very much for your time, and I hope we will speak again. And I will link
yeah.
to your
Yeah.
various
And if you
initiatives.
can get also help us to organize something here in dialogue Asia Europe, that we have a sort of event like this with two or three from Asia to come here to speak their perspective on the whole thing.
I'll be happy to recommend you
Yeah.
very, very good people. Very happy to do
Okay.
so.
Wonderful.
Thank you,
Okay.
Michael.
Take care.
All the
Bye-bye.
best.
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Take
Thank
care.
you. Bye-bye. Bye.